Welcome in to the Storycraft Cafe. Your two host, Hank Garner, Doug Lansborough, here to have another one of our fireside chats. Neither one of us have a fire. Doug has a fireplace. It is not lit, but it was a fun title that um, kind of stuck for whatever reason. But we have had such a great time with this series of shows where we take a topic and we were just laughing before we went live because we were saying that we come up with a topic. I come up with a list of things. Doug comes up with a list of things. We don't tell each other what we're thinking, and hilarity ensues. So, welcome, Doug. Thanks for joining me again.
Thank you. I'm waiting backfires. That one of us just comes up with something so out of the blue or atrocious that the other one's just stunned.
You're
Just
right. We're just like, how can I even? What were you thinking? What were you thinking? So today we had an idea to talk about characters that are maybe a little unlikable, at least on the surface. And we can name a number of characters that have been used in popular fiction that seem to be sometimes just horrible people. And in the end, you sort of wind up rooting for them and cheering them on. And maybe it's a character arc that has some great redemption. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the folks are just a cad and that appeals to something in us. I don't know if that says more about the character or the writer or the reader. I'm not sure, but maybe some of each. Um, so anyway, what immediately came to your mind, Doug, when we started talking about this topic?
what immediately came to my mind was actually redemption arcs. Funny that you mentioned it because that
I love a great redemption arc.
oh,
I'm sorry.
who doesn't, right?
Right.
Like they are they're so good. And I know
Yeah.
from our chats while we're working that you just started watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, like the
Yes.
the cartoon, right? How
Yes.
far into it are you? Don't
I
disappoint
just
me here.
started season 3.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you're well into then Prince Zuko's redemption, or at least the start of it, right?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that when you mention redemption arcs, you can't mention redemption arcs without mentioning that one because it is so good. And something that people really love about redemption arcs is that you start so bad and you are the villain. Zuko was the villain,
Right.
but he wasn't a twirl your mustache, I want to destroy the world villain. He was a
Right.
villain that we could empathize with that we could sympathize with, and then he changes over time into my favorite character in the series, probably. I know it's my wife's favorite character in the series. So there's power in that.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, a character that I think of pretty quickly is Severus Snape. That is a character that in the beginning you absolutely loathe, and then as the 7 books progress and the story unfolds, he's still not. And I find this interesting the way that Rowling did this. In the end, he's not necessarily a character that's your favorite, but you just you I don't there's something that connects with him that even though he's not your typical hero in shining armor, there's still something a little dark and twisted about him. Um, but you have to respect where he's coming from, and I think that was well done.
Yeah, he's redeemed in the sense that his redemption arc is complete, but he does not turn into, I guess he is a hero because he dies for our
Yeah,
hero. But he's not necessarily a great person. He's good,
right.
he sacrifices himself, but if he were still alive, he'd still be kind of a jerk.
Right. He's kind of a jerk, but he does noble things, and
Yeah.
you have to appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he does well, and I think that a lot of redemption arcs do well, is this idea of sacrifice. Because if you've done terrible things, I think a reader or an audience member or a writer even wants you to atone for those more than just, oh, I've learned my lesson. Right? There
Right.
needs to be almost like a punishment for what you've done to make you unlikable in the beginning, in order to bring you back to the level where we can say, yeah, I really like you now.
Yeah. Do you think that we as readers, or watchers, or, however we consume this piece of media, do you think that we like, the punishment aspect? Do you think we like to see, a character go through what we feel like is a proper redemption arc? They have to be punished. They have to feel bad for what they did, and then the good can come out of that. Or do you think it can be carried out another way?
I think I think there are some people that like it. They're really all about people getting their comeuppance. But I think more than that, it would feel empty without it. Like if
Right.
there wasn't that retribution, or that penance, or that lesson learned, then we would feel like they didn't earn it, or there's something missing more than anything else.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What's another character that you can think of uh, that has a great arc, or um, that maybe doesn't have a great arc, but you find yourself rooting for them regardless of whether they're a good person or not,
Well, I
by
think they do have a good arc.
whomever standards.
Yeah, I think Loki in the
Mm,
Marvel movies and series, right? He started out as a very bad character, obviously the villain, but even
right,
from the get-go, we can see he's overshadowed by his brother. He's really doing this more for attention and to get on the same level as those around him than to really rule the world. And he had his kind of ebb and flow throughout the movies, but then when they actually launched the Loki TV show,
right,
and he was obviously the main character, we got to see a lot more about him, and that really solidified. Hey, he was a villain, then he was an anti-hero, and now he's just, well, he's always been a great character, mostly because of the actor who, like, who doesn't, is Tom Hiddleston? Did I say that
right.
right?
I think
So
so, yeah.
okay, um, who doesn't love him, right?
Right.
But I think that journey really showed a good example of villain to anti-hero, still to, not to spoil the end of season 2 of Loki for anyone that still hasn't seen it, but to a genuine hero that does sacrifice himself to the points we were just talking about, sacrifices himself to save everybody.
Get literally.
Literally, the multiverse.
Literally. The multiverse. He literally puts himself at the center of the hub, and
Yeah.
there it is. Yeah. Um, he here's an interesting, couple of characters that I thought about. The Lannister twins, Cersei and,
Mhm,
Jaime.
mhm.
Um, in the beginning, of that book series, well, and I can't say by the end because it'll never end, or the TV show, however, they're, you're not sure if you like them or not, and then you find out, "Oh, I definitely don't like them." And
Mhm,
then, they through a series of events, it's almost like, George Martin humanized them in a
mhm.
way, and in a way that he did not in the beginning, and you start to you see all of their flaws, and all of the horrible things that they've done for numerous reasons, but by humanizing them, it's like he gives us something to connect with them, and we can almost see our own shortcomings, and we feel empathy with them, and I think that's a good example of people that behave horribly, um, but we can at least connect to their humanity. It's an interesting arc that those 2 characters, go
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I mean, not to jump ahead, but you touched on one of my other points that I have
Yeah.
jotted down here, which are flaws, and we can
Yes.
revisit this later because flaws are super important,
Oh, of
but
course.
for those
And
2
and
specifically.
most of us have no shortage of them, so
Yeah.
that's
I actually thought as I was writing my notes how much I tell my wife, that she should be very happy with how much character potential I have because of all my flaws. So
I love it. I love it. It's amazing.
With Jamie and Cersei, um, they are flawed and they are unlikable and then they change in very different ways. Right? And I'm
Right.
mostly basing this off the TV show because I haven't read all the books. And we won't
Nor will you
necessarily.
ever.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, George.
Uh,
We don't need to
um,
pluck the low hanging fruit.
but they grow in different ways, whereas Jamie has some of that redemption. Um, at the start, not necessarily intentionally, but we see from the beginning that there's almost like this nugget of good in him,
Yeah.
and then that kind of blossoms and we get more looks into that. I don't know if he necessarily becomes a full-fledged hero. And
Right.
I am struggling a little bit to remember some of those seasons, but I know that his sister is so bad for so much of that movie, but at the
Yes.
same time, you hate her, but you enjoy hating her because she's so good at it.
Right.
Right, and I think part of that, again, thinking about the TV show, it's played by Lena Headey, I believe, or she's played by Lena Headey, who does a fantastic job, right?
Yeah.
Excellent job at that character. But it's interesting because you see her almost sophisticated evil versus her sons in the early season, Joffrey's, who was just a jerk, who was just
For no
words I can't
reason.
say on stream.
Right. Right.
And
Exactly.
that's different because he was just as unlikable, maybe more unlikable, but there was almost nothing likable about him. We
Yeah.
enjoyed when he got his
He was
due.
just evil personified.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when Cersei had the whole shame incident, you felt sorry for her, not just because
Right.
it was a graphic and terrible thing that happened,
Yeah.
but because you're so attached to this character now because you've also got her perspective on things. It's not just a villain that we encounter, it's someone whose perspective we have at that point.
Right. And there was a little bit of subtext there with her character that there's a little bit of family preservation that played into that, and that you see this person in this horrible situation, and but in the end, or somewhere along the way, she's just trying to protect what's hers, and
Mhm,
in a weird, twisted way, there's something about that you can kind of respect, and it really makes you think about how you see the world when you see these other people and all of their messed up ways,
mhm.
and I think it really helps you to process how you think about things as well, which is a whole other um
But that's the
discussion.
point,
Yeah,
right? That's the point
exactly.
of unlikable characters that aren't just bad people.
Right.
And I think what you just mentioned there, you're hitting all my points today, Hank, is the motivation aspect. If you
Yeah.
want an unlikable character to be liked or to be at least appreciated, their motivation has to make sense.
Right.
And Joffrey, so again to juxtapose, had no real motivation aside from I've got a lot of power and I'm a child and I'm a twisted person. That's not motivation. That's just an unfortunate series of traits in one person. Uh,
Right.
the but Cersei had that motivation to keep the power in her family, to protect her son, to then protect her kingdom, to all these different things that if we were put in those same shoes, sure, maybe I wouldn't launch a whole war, across several countries to do to I don't know. I don't wanna say something that's gonna come back and bite me later when, like, we have a kid. But but, like, you can see, hey, this is something that's very important to her, and she'll go to the ends of the earth to do it. And I think a
Right.
lot of people have those elements in their life that they might not do the same thing because they physically can't, but they can relate to it.
Right. Here's a character that I found on some online lists that I don't necessarily agree with, but I wanted to get your perspective on this. And it's
Alright.
Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. It has been 30 years since I read that
Mhm.
book, and I detested it when I read it. I hated Catcher in the Rye. There was I I could not understand why people raved about this book and why it went on to be this cult, hit or whatever. And I hated the character of Holden Caulfield. So this one that I disagreed with people, and I truly want to hear what you think about Holden Caulfield.
So it has been at least half my life since I read that book.
Yeah,
And I remember I
same.
had to look up his character for an article that we had on W. And I'm struggling here, but correct me if I'm wrong. He's a pretty, isn't he like an angsty teenager?
Yes,
Yeah. So
yes, for no
as
good reason.
well, is anyone an angsty? I mean, I guess there are some
No,
angsty teenagers that are justified, but as an angsty teen when I read it, I could relate to that. Right. The
yeah,
world didn't understand me. I had all these thoughts and ideas, and everyone should just listen to me, and mom and dad stop treating me like I'm a kid, even though I have homework to do and I need your permission to go to this field trip. Like I think I think anytime you have angst or anytime you have that rebellious nature, you will have
yeah,
people that gravitate towards it.
yeah. Do you think that Holden had, other than just an angsty teenager relating to an angsty teenager, was there anything about that character that had, um, did he need a redemption arc, or did he just serve a place for other people to relate to? Like, was an arc necessary for him, or was
Mhm.
it just a reflection of the reader?
I'm trying
If that
so hard to remember this book right now.
I know. I really struggled with digging those memories
I need
out
a
as well.
summary. This is what I'm talking about when I said it's gonna come back to bite us, because if I had had a weekend to refresh myself on Catcher in the Rye, we would have been
Right.
golden. I don't know. I truly don't know, but I think it can't be undervalued how much a placeholder character can be for the reader. Like a lot
Yeah,
of characters, that's the entire intention, right? To
right.
put ourselves in their shoes. So if that is all he is to somebody, then that's fine. I think it's done successfully. I also don't remember having the same passionate distaste for this book that you do. so so I don't know. My poor memory might not be as tainted as yours.
Well, that was my hot take for the day, so that's out of the way. Feel free to drop yours when you want, but do you have another character you'd like to explore?
Let's see. A character that is unlikable, but then turns likable. I'm trying to think about something that's a little more common. I went for more of the craft aspect for
Yeah.
this talk, but and hmm, let me think about it as we keep
Okay.
chatting, and then I'll
W
suddenly interrupt you.
what
And
about, Jay Gatsby from The Great Gatsby?
yeah, yeah, from the Great Oh, yeah, of course. I think I think as a modern Doug, who has very polarized opinions on something, I would read The Great Gatsby today and strongly dislike Jay Gatsby.
Yeah,
As a
same.
younger Doug, who was very enamored with, oh, this is how the rich live, and this is what happens when you have enough money to have power and you can do whatever you want. I think that aspect, that you can see potential in a character like him, and I think that's really alluring to people, because at the end of the day, he's not a good person. He's
No.
not. No, like I don't know. What are your thoughts on Mr. Gatsby?
Same, same.
Oh,
There's something, kind of darkly alluring about that
mhm,
character, maybe, that resonates with people. But yeah, in the end, he's not a great guy,
mhm,
and you just have to. I think it's more the forbidden pleasure aspect, maybe, that makes some characters, kind of the reason, like, that we like heist movies. Usually
mhm,
heist movies, they're fantastic, and we love all of the machinations that go into putting together a great heist, but usually somebody's stealing from somebody
Yeah.
else. It's not a good thing
On a grand
generally.
scale.
On a grand scale, it's usually, and you can find a way to think that it's a Robin Hood sort of story,
Mhm.
but most of the time it's not a good situation, but we love it anyway. And I think
Mhm.
there's a bit of that about Gatsby that we like, that's just kind of the you know maybe we shouldn't, but we do.
Yeah. I'm thinking I'm trying to think of a heist movie now, and I don't think I've ever read a heist book, so I'm only thinking about movies where the heist isn't being done for a grander reason, right? Either the company they're stealing from is evil, or it's a parent trying to make ends meet and this is their last job or something. Like that's kind of the tie-in to make this unlikable action of theft into something that we can understand. And again, it goes back to the motivation,
Right.
right? It's if you can justify why someone's doing what they're doing, it makes the unlikable a lot more tolerable, a lot more palatable, if not like a good thing. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to think about Jay Gatsby, and I can't. I'm struggling to think of motivation that makes me want to like him. So,
Yeah, there's a bit of the someone who's not supposed to be somewhere getting to be there. There's a little of that delicious, you know, aspect that, oh, he's kind of cracked the code and he gets to, to be where he's not wanted. There's a little bit of that.
mhm,
Um, I don't know, but it's been around forever, and it
yeah,
it has stood the test of time. There's something about that character or those characters that people love.
yeah,
So maybe that's an
yeah.
exploration for another day. Speaking though, if you've never read a heist novel, the guy that wrote the Dexter series of books,
Mm,
Jeff
mhm,
Lindsay, is that his name? Jeff Lindsay writes
maybe.
another series that's heist novels, and they're
Okay,
fantastic. If you get a
okay.
chance to, if you're ever looking for some, that's your
That's the one.
recommendation for today.
And I
Jeff Lindsay,
know
I believe is his name.
there's like a whole cinematic heist universe on Netflix that
Right.
I've seen, Money Heist, that I've never seen. So someone's gonna be
Same.
like, "Well, they didn't do it for good reasons. They're
Yeah.
just." But that's fine.
What's
That's
the
fine.
I'm thinking of the Oceans movies,
Yeah,
Oceans
Oceans.
11, where they're robbing, casinos,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I mean, there are no good guys in that. The casinos, you could argue, are terrible people, and,
yeah.
you know, not to offend anyone out there that owns a casino that
That owns a
might be
casino.
watching and is working on their first novel,
But in that
aside.
same regard, in that case, it's either viewed as the greater evil,
Right.
generally headed by someone who has too much money to know what they can do with, or
Yep.
what we really like about those characters then is that they have a particular set of skills that
Yes.
makes them almost superhero in nature, right?
Right. And it's
Like that.
gathering the team of those people
Yeah,
that each one has a specialty, and
yeah,
we just love to see it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
um,
Um,
I had a character in mind.
okay.
Actually, I had a character in mind that is so unlikable that I'm shocked it made it into 2 movies. And I don't know if you ever saw, Prometheus, like the prequel to
I
Alien.
did. It's been
Yeah,
when it first came out, so it's been 10
like 7,
years?
8, 10 years, yeah. So
Something like
the
that.
android in it, David, um,
Okay, yeah.
is so wholeheartedly unlikable. And in it,
Yes.
like, I guess this is more a thing about if you're going to write an unlikable character, don't do this. Because throughout the movie, he doesn't do anything redeeming. He doesn't do anything endearing to the viewers or other characters. He is just scheming and plotting the whole time, and then he ruins everyone's lives. Like it is a sequence of unlikable events, and then they brought him back for the sequel to that movie, which was I can't remember. I can't even remember the name anymore. Um, but he was just bad still. He just lured them there to then experiment on them more with with alien stuff or something like that. And you can tell that my passion for this movie now is just disliking this character.
Right.
So, and that's what lingers. there was just no logic behind the motivation. There was no redemption. There were no necessarily any flaws in the character other than he's just bad. So
Right.
I don't know.
Well,
That was my hot take.
maybe we need to add another classification for unlikable characters and just put under the hate watch. That
Yeah.
I just hate them and I just watch it just to get to hate watch it.
That's what I'm gonna do after this. I'll go hate
Yeah.
watch it.
Right. I think I have one more. How about Tyler Durden from Fight Club?
Yeah, okay.
That's
Yes.
that's a that's a morally complex character. Let's
Yeah.
just say.
And he provides so yes, objectively, I think if you look at it from a 1,000-foot view, bad
Right.
guy, right? Not a good person. But as you zoom in closer and closer, he represents the freedom that everybody kind of wants at a base level. Like we
Right.
all I don't want to get super philosophical or anything here, but we all have to live within, and I mean it's the theme of the movie and the book, but we all have to live within these boundaries that are established to be in a successful and prosperous society.
Right.
And he represents what happens if I can do whatever I want. And people like that because they can read about it and suffer no consequences. In real life, we can't do that. So he is again a stand-in for the reader to experience the thrill of a life without rules. Um,
Yeah.
and we as people appreciate that fictionally.
Right. Fictionally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the first rule of Fireside Chats? Yeah. We don't talk about it.
We don't.
So
We also beat
so
each other up after.
right. Right. So now that we've kind of identified some characters that people might be able to relate to as writers, how can we include these sorts of characters into our story um, while giving the reader some complexity to latch
Mhm,
onto. And just some notes that I jotted down. I said these characters are often selfish, morally ambiguous, or even villainous, but their complexity, depth, and the way they challenge readers' expectations make them unforgettable and fascinating to explore. Um,
mm,
so how can we do that? And kind of famously, um, like I have the Save the Cat Writes a Novel book here on my shelf, and that the originally that title Save the Cat came from the original book, which was talking about screenwriting, not novel writing,
mhm,
which I don't actually own the original book. But the term "save the cat" came from, if I'm not mistaken, that if you have a character that you really want viewers, because we're talking about screenwriting, you really want viewers um, to resonate with, to latch on to, give them something heroic to do early in the movie. Maybe they seem to be a horrible character, but stick a cat in a tree and have them save the cat. And then
mhm.
they instantly, and it is kind of a tongue in cheek thing that, went on to have a life of its own, obviously. Um, but is it that easy? I always kind of thought of that and it's like, well, that seems cheap. Um, but is it that easy? Do you find it takes more than that
Yeah,
to
yeah, I
build
think it definitely
loyalty?
does. Yeah, and I think that worked 40, 50 years ago. Like
Yeah,
storytelling has evolved and the consumption of stories has
yeah,
exploded. So people are more critical and it's happening more often than ever before. So if I were to write a story today and just had my villain, save a cat from a tree or help an old woman cross the road or do something very small in terms
right,
of a morally good action, and then went on to have them be just this terrible human being, that wouldn't jive. Readers wouldn't understand. There's no consistency there, right? But what you mentioned at the start of this part of the fireside chat is that you need a complex character. You need to layer a character if you want them to be unlikable but likable. If you want them to be bad but the favorite of half your readership, right? You need backstory, you need motivation, you need flaws, you need character traits, you need relationships, you need a million different things,
Yeah.
right?
Get right.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I didn't mean to
No, it's
throw you off.
just you if you are going to cop out and just have them save the cat for lack of a better analogy, then it's going to fall flat. And you're not just going to have an unlikable character, but you're going to have an unlikable character that your readers are confused why they did this one simple thing
Right.
that's so out of character for them.
Right. So here's a question. Say you're writing a fantasy series. Let's just because I think that's a great vehicle for for characters that have these big character arcs.
Hmm.
And say you've got an antagonist in book 1 that you know that in book 3 is going to have a huge change and that readers are going to love. Um, how do you get readers to stay on board in book 1 when you as the writer know that down the road you've got this thing that's really gonna pay off and readers are gonna love it, but will they stick around for that? You know, what do you do to build this attachment, for readers to have to this character while not just losing them because this person is heinous and I mean, how do you get readers to stay for the the full
The
character
redemption,
arc?
the yeah. So it's like you custom made this question for me because in my current series, I have the antagonist in book 1, and I'm writing book 3 right now, and he is at that moment. He's at that turning point where he goes from villain to almost anti-hero, I want to say.
Yeah,
And he's got a couple more books to work on that. But I still remember after I wrote my first book, the villain's name is Dante, and I got tagged in a tweet back when I had Twitter that said, well, love this book. It was so much fun. Love the villain. Hashtag Team Dante. And I thought that was one of the proudest moments of my life that a
oh
stranger
yeah.
just made up this hashtag about my villain. Right. And he is one of my favorite characters to write, but it's because I give him that screen time in the book. I think if you want to make that sort of broad villain to not villain shift, have scenes or chapters from their perspective and treat them just like you would your protagonist, right? Back to the backstory, relationships, motivations, especially. If you have a villain that doesn't have at least an understandable motivation, if not a relatable one, it's not going to work ever in a million years.
Well, one thing that I've heard that's kind of, become trite because it's been, said and resaid and used so many times is every character is the hero of their own story. Is that a bit what you're talking about? That you give this character screen time, page time, you
Hmm.
explore backstory, motivations, so that the readers can see that uh, because most of the times, and there are exceptions, most
Hmm.
of the times antagonist or bad guys, if we want to say it like that, um, are not doing things just because they're evil. Of
Hmm.
course, there are characters that are evil just for evil's sake. Most of the time, though, the more interesting characters are evil for another reason. Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying? Explore the other reason from
Yeah.
their
And
perspective.
and what I've done specifically is it made him aware that he knows what he's doing isn't good, but he's
Right.
doing it anyway because he feels like he needs to, and he feels like that is his purpose. Um, and I don't want to dive into the whole plot or character arc, but if you make your villain aware like that, or if you make a bad guy aware like that, then it lends even more weight, I think, to the motivation. But you need to support it with their actions, with their dialogue, with their backstory, what happened before the book even started to make them that way. Um, because it's a very delicate structure. and it can come crumbling down really easily if just like one of those bricks is out of place. And
Right.
that's something that I'm very cognizant of when I'm writing these scenes. And I think that's true for all characters. Like everything kind of has to be in place. But if you're trying to build a very specific type of character, like an empathetic villain, then you really need to focus on the parts that are drawing in that empathy.
Right. Right. One thing that I have found great success in writing these sorts of characters is to use humor or wit um, for this
Hmm.
darker character, and that helps people to find a connection there because we all love to, you know, throw snark and shade, and you know, if you can get a character who can do that, you know, unabashedly with abandon and
Hmm.
say the things that we've always wanted to say, even if it's not right, even if we know that our mother would be terribly embarrassed by us, you know, that's always fun and can likely uh endear a character to readers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you see it most often. This is going to sound fantasy-ish, but it's not just fantasy, but in that like charming or dashing highwayman kind of uh, trope,
Right.
where they're robbing you at gunpoint, taking all your valuables, but they're flirting, they're smiling, they're cracking jokes at the same time. Like,
Right.
okay, you're doing a bad thing, you're threatening my life and taking my property, but you're funny and you're cute, and so we're automatically endeared to that character. And a lot of the time, that character can then take the weight off of really dark situations that maybe they themselves caused or they deserve
Right.
to be in. But that makes it more palatable for us as
Right.
readers as well. So it gives us
Right.
that time to explore.
Absolutely. Um Internal dialogue. Sometimes that is helpful um to explore a character's motivations, and then that
Mhm.
helps. But I think that I say that with trepidation because that can be um, overused. I'm thinking about fantasy specifically. You know, we've all read fantasy books where this internal monologue goes on for pages and
Ever.
pages and pages, and they just, you know, they're the super villain, you know, mustache twirling monologue, you know, as you've got Superman tied up with you know, with kryptonite chains, you monologue and tell everything that you've ever wanted to do, you know, while Superman's, you know, fiddling with the lock or something, and then, so that has to be, I think internal monologue, or, you know, exploring how this character is thinking to himself or herself, as opposed to what he projects to the world. You know, I think that can be very handy. You just have to be careful not to overdo it.
Yeah, you have to be careful not to overdo it, and you have to make sure that you're doing it in the right place.
Right.
So to
And in the
build
right
this kind
context.
Yeah, exactly. And to build this character, I'm assuming it's a villain this whole time, but it could be just a crass, unlikable
Right.
secondary character, right? But
Sure.
if it is the villain, if you are giving them their own scenes, because they need their own scenes, first of all, from their perspective, if you're going to have any kind of internal monologue. If they're just monologuing at someone, that's fine. It can be from the perspective of the hero of Superman fiddling with his locks.
Yeah.
Um, but but then you need to balance out your book around having different perspectives in it, which is something that people can do really well. It's something that I love reading, and some people absolutely hate it. So you need to practice that, make sure that there's a good balance throughout, because you also don't want to have this villain for 2 acts and then in the third act, out of nowhere, have a scene from their perspective where they're suddenly saying, yeah, I'm trying to burn the city down because of this really sad thing that happened to me 20 years ago. Like that, you need the consistency in that as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Here's another one. Give the character a strong moral code. Even if a character makes questionable decisions, showing that they have a strong sense of morality or a personal code they adhere to can make them more likable and respectable. couple of examples I thought about was Marvel's Punisher,
Mm,
or John Wick,
mhm,
someone that does horrible, heinous things, but for the right reason. Um, that there's I know I was thinking about those two properties specifically. No one can argue that they're doing the right thing,
mhm.
um, you know, but
But we could understand why they're doing
we could understand
it.
exactly,
And
exactly.
it's interesting because those two characters are similar in that
Right.
they are both assassins or killers,
Sure.
but they are very different in their morals as well. So you
Right.
have the Punisher, who, if you didn't understand his motivation, is a heinously awful villain,
Yeah.
absolutely disgusting. But because you understand the motivation, you can side with him at times. You might not like his means, you might like his means, I don't know. But
Yeah.
you can understand why he's doing it. And his code is in his name. It's punishment, right? And he sticks to that. John Wick, on the other hand, almost went through like a reformation. He was that bad guy, and then he got out of it. He was living the good life, and then he was dragged back into it. His
Right.
moral code was forcefully shifted by an
Yeah.
external, presence, right? And I think both end up in the same place, but who they were beforehand and the morals that they during it are very different, but both are very likable as a result.
Yeah. And never mess with a man's dog.
Never, I wasn't gonna say it, but if anyone messed with my dog, who,
Yeah.
I might have to dig up the garage.
Yeah, all bets are off.
Yeah,
That's all I'm
exactly.
saying. Yeah.
um, do you who's your favorite out of the 2? Punisher or John
Oh,
Wick?
I I John Wick,
Yeah.
I think, um, you know, mm, I would, yeah, just, Keanu Reeves is
True.
endearing on his own,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
so huggable and, um
Even as he's shooting. I was gonna say, I actually, of the 2, I love Keanu Reeves. I think he's a
yeah,
national treasure. But
yeah,
the Punisher, because there's such that um, traumatic background to him, and because
right,
it's such a visceral response, that is such an interesting character to me. That is
yes,
so fascinating, and the fact that the Punisher too, like I just said, when we were talking about Save the Cat, that that motivation would, or that display of moral would work 40, 50 years ago. The Punisher, the character, is something like 40 or 50 years old at this point, maybe even
right,
older. And his backstory, it's changed a little. Like, I don't read all the comics, but it's changed a little over time. But it's been the core thing since the beginning, the core event of his family. Um, and so that's an interesting case study in a likable, terrible character. If anyone
right,
wants to dive deep on that.
yeah. Here's another one I wrote down. Highlight their positive relationships. Show the characters' interactions with others, particularly any positive relationships they may have. This can help readers see a different side of a character and understand their capacity for kindness or compassion. I was thinking about a character specifically when I wrote this one, and I cannot for the life of me remember what the book was, but there was a character that was a villain, or seemed to be on the surface, and then when he would come home, he had an ailing mother that he was taking care of, and you got to see that his actions during the day were because he was trying to provide for this ailing mother. And as twisted as that relationship wound up being, there was something that was innately human about that, and it just
Hmm.
made you want to root for him in a weird way. And it made me very conflicted as a reader, and I think that was the entire purpose, was to make me want to keep coming back to the page to find out what was going to happen next. And I'll think of, as soon as this is over, I know it'll pop in my head what
You'll
story
message
that
me.
was, but I remember the relationship specifically, even if I can't remember who it was. But that just always stuck with me, the way that the writer um, brought out those characteristics of the character were really well done.
Well, and you mentioned Dexter before, And correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he had that same kind of vulnerability with his sister. And I think that this works so effectively because you can have a monster, but then
Right.
show that there is a chip in the armor, right, or a crack in the wall, and that means that there is potential for more as well. So it humanizes them, but it gives us something to look forward to if that redemption arc comes in. Or as a writer, it opens up a way to absolutely devastate this character and turn them into
Right.
even more of a monster if the story calls for it. That's my kind of story, Hank. That's the kind of story that I
Yeah.
write. So
Oh, that's so funny.
but you
Um,
you can even consider that like a flaw for
yeah,
a bad character to have this kind of vulnerability. To them, they might consider it a flaw, and them considering it a flaw might be a flaw from a characterization point of view. Like there's many there's onion levels of layer,
sure.
onion levels of layers in this that you can exploit as a writer. And it's all about just staying away from that mustache twirler, right?
Right.
If you take away anything from this, it's don't just write a villain that's villainous or a bad guy that's bad, or add something,
Yeah.
add a light
Don't
or
write
people.
two-dimensional characters.
Yeah,
Give
right.
give them
Unless they're the cabbage
complexity and
guy
yeah, well,
from
yeah.
from Avatar. uh, any
Another
more on
thing
your side?
I wrote, show their loyalty, but that kind of plays into the previous one,
Mhm,
loyalty to friends, family, or a cause that makes them more likable. That's just kind of a tack on to the previous one. Um, Create a sense of mystery, giving a character an intriguing or mysterious background. Um, that kind of goes with everything else we've said, but as a way of drawing out the character arc or giving the readers the sense that there's more to this character. I'm just not
mhm,
telling you what it is yet, but there's build intrigue there that which again is kind of playing with you're playing with the reader's expectation that
mhm.
there's going to be more to this character, even if I as the writer don't know what that is yet. I kinda if I'm, in more of a pantser mode and I'm exploring this character as I write him, maybe it's a good thing to add in some of that mystery and intrigue and allude to some big change that's coming, even if I haven't figured out what that big change is yet.
Yeah, and I think this touches back to Jay Gatsby as well. One of the
Yeah,
reasons that he's more likable is because we don't know a whole lot about him. If we knew from page 1, like, oh, there's this rich guy on the other side of the river that was born into wealth and just throws these parties because he likes women and drinks and drugs, then he will remain unlikable for time immemorial, right? He can
right,
sacrifice himself to save a baby and he will still be unlikable. But because we want to know more, we're like drawn in. We appreciate the individual character traits more. We want to see what they'll do next, and we don't know what they'll do next. So
right, right. Um, yeah, the the unpredictability of a character, is a great tool to use as well.
yeah, yeah.
Never knowing what they're gonna do. Did you ever read Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn?
No, my better half did.
Okay.
She really liked it.
Well, Gone Girl really shifted the psychological thriller space in that every book since then has been under the umbrella of the unreliable narrator, or at
Yep.
least forced to occupy the space that Gone Girl occupies in there. And people, anytime they read a book like that, they're immediately suspicious of the narrator because Gone
Hmm.
Girl did it so well that the
Hmm.
first half of the book, you believe this world is one way, and then the flip happens in the middle of the book, and then all bets are off. You have no idea who anybody is really, what this world is like. Everything you thought you knew, you are immediately distrustful of, and it just all bets are off. I mean, she just completely flipped the genre on its head, all by using this narrator that you had built trust in and loyalty to, and then have the rug pulled out from under you. So that's it's a bit of the opposite of what we're talking
Yeah.
about. She built this loyalty, this reader loyalty, and then yanks it away from us halfway through the book, and then you're trying to figure out who anybody is or who they really are at after this point. um so that I had just written down the narrator, how you play with who's narrating the story can depend greatly on whether people latch onto a character, or they like them or trustful of them, or find them distrustful. Your narrator plays a big part in that.
Yeah, and there is the unreliable narrator, and then there is a narrator that, just unless they are an omniscient third person narrator,
Right,
they are innately biased or unreliable on some things. Like if
right,
you take Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf is a monster. If you tell it from the wolf's perspective, the wolf's hungry, right? The wolf's just doing what it was made to do, kind of thing.
right.
And that those are two very different tales. But I think you can really play with that too when making these likable, unlikable characters, by showing us two different perspectives of the character, one from in their head, or maybe someone adjacent to them, and one from the protagonist's head, or another side character or something, and give us those two different polarities that we can play with, and let the reader come to their own opinion, and then kind of just smack him over the head with something.
Mm.
Like, drop
Right.
drop the bomb towards the end. I am trying to think though. Like I read, is it Where the Crawdads Sing? Um, a couple years ago, 2 years
Delia
ago maybe.
Owens.
Yeah, I believe so. Um, Let me just see the cover. Yep, that's it. And and towards the end, there's the big reveal, and you realize that our narrator hasn't necessarily been truthful the whole way along. And
Right.
I enjoyed the twist. I think a lot of people saw it coming, kind of, but I don't know if I liked the character after that came out, and I
Yeah.
don't know how I necessarily felt about the book as a whole when this character that we were rooting for suddenly became unlikable, but we were expected from 95% of the book to continue liking them.
Well, it sold 40 bajillion copies,
Right?
so,
Like, who am I? Who?
right, I had the same thoughts, but, people just kept buying boxes and
Yeah.
boxes of them, so,
And it
yeah,
was an enjoyable read.
it
Don't get me
was.
wrong. I think the
Yeah,
book was good. I think I was enwrapped in it. Um, but I just don't know if, like, I can't say that I like that character now that
yeah.
not only was it revealed that they did something that is justifiable after you read the book, but like, you just lied to us for however many hundreds of pages. And I think that's a I don't know. I'm trying to think of a way to tie this back into our conversation here, because I think it has a point, but I'm losing the thread as I'm speaking. So, but do you know what I'm saying, Hank? Can you save me
I do.
here?
Yes, yes, I know what you're saying, like, the unreliable narrator has become a staple
Mhm,
in this certain genre, and it has to be handled carefully because readers are suspicious,
mhm,
and you're going to find more and more people trying more elaborate ways to pull the rug out from under readers, but handle those things carefully, and give when you do that, when you completely shake up your story, do it for a reason. Make sure that there's a something that the reader is at least left to wrestle with, or ponder at the end, and
mhm.
not just close the book and say, "Well, that was a cheap shot that the writer, tried."
And then he woke up from his dream. Uh, don't do that. I guess
No.
I guess what I was trying to say with it, that came to me, like, well, you forced it upon me with your
Yeah.
brilliance. Um, the character doesn't have to be likable. It can
Right.
just be an unlikable character. The book is still good, even though I don't like the character because of the last
Right.
2 pages.
Yeah.
Um, and that's an
Well,
effective storytelling
and
method.
life is generally good, and there are characters in life that are just unlikable. It's just a
Mhm,
fact of
mhm.
nature,
Yeah,
you
like
know?
people who don't say good morning to you when you're walking your dog past them and you say good
G
morning.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, or yeah, yeah.
Well, I think
I've
we've
started
covered
to
all the bases that I had.
I did.
Uh,
I had one last thing, and
okay.
I'll just
Yeah.
touch on this just briefly. Make them an underdog. I said readers often root for underdogs, but the more I thought about that, um, then you have the tendency for an underdog to overplay their hand, and an underdog, if not treated correctly or nurtured correctly, will become a bully. And
Mhm,
you've got, we could name any schoolyard bully that we find out was bullied, himself when he was younger,
mhm.
and that is a maybe uh, uh, something for us to watch out for in our own characters. If we've got an underdog, and if not given um, the proper attention in their character growth, they can then become, an evil character just for evil's sake, or it seems. So anyway,
Yeah,
that didn't go where I thought it was going to go, but anyway,
no, but I think it raises a valid point in that if you're trying to make an unlikable character likable, you need to make sure you're not venturing into cliche territory,
right,
because there are 5 different ways you can do it, and if you just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's been done a million times before. We all like the schoolyard bully that has issues at home or a traumatic past can make for an effective character, but we've read that and we've watched that so many times at this point that it's not saving the cat, right? Maybe it went save the cat to schoolyard bully with a bad home life to whatever the next iteration is. But you can
right,
see that saving the cat is a simple act, and schoolyard bully with a bad home life is more complex than that. And I think
right,
as we write more and more as a collective society of writers, we you need to focus on more complexity, on more depth, not necessarily just complexity, but depth, right? Think
right,
about that reasoning. Think about things that people haven't put together before, or take time to just develop that character. Right? It's not just the schoolyard bully with a rough home life, but he's also working 2 part-time jobs to pay for groceries for his sister because his dad, finds the bottom of the bottle every night, and then he has to go to the kid that he's bullying to get help with homework because he's so tired he can't study anymore. Like, there are so many things you can layer on there
right.
that it just takes time. Just don't be cliche with it.
Absolutely. Don't be cliche.
That's it.
If you take anything away from this discussion, don't be cliche. And that, kind viewers and listeners, has been our discussion this week on how to make characters likable even when they don't deserve it. Join us again a couple of weeks from now, where Doug and I will take another topic and beat it into submission. And we will, well, I think we have a topic coming up, but we'll announce that soon. And be sure to join us then. Doug, as always, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Hank.